My beloved child, pause for one impossible moment, because somewhere, in a conversation you were never supposed to hear, your name has quietly become the center of attention. What makes this so unusual is not that they are speaking about you, but the reason they cannot seem to stop. Stay with this story a little longer, because the first impression is rarely the real one. What appears ordinary from a distance often hides a truth powerful enough to change the direction of two lives forever. Imagine a room filled with familiar voices. Some are calm. Some are uncertain. Others are simply watching, trying to understand something they cannot explain. No one expected your name to enter the conversation that day, yet once it did, the atmosphere shifted in a way no one could ignore. It was as though an invisible thread connected every thought back to you. Questions began to replace assumptions. Silence replaced quick judgments. And someone, without even realizing it, whispered a sentence that changed the tone of the entire discussion. What if we haven't understood this person correctly? That single question lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. You see, people often believe families only talk when they have doubts. But sometimes they gather because curiosity becomes stronger than uncertainty. They notice little things. Tiny details. The way your soulmate's expression changes whenever your name appears. The unexpected smile they try to hide. The quiet moments when they seem lost in thought. None of those moments escape the attention of the people closest to them. And that is where today's story truly begins. Because the real reason behind their conversation is nothing like the rumors your imagination might create. What if the discussion was never about whether you belong, but about understanding why your presence has created such a deep impact? Think about that. Sometimes the strongest evidence isn't spoken directly. It reveals itself through change. A different attitude. New confidence. Unexpected peace. Your soulmate has been changing in ways even they cannot fully explain. Their family has noticed it. They have watched ordinary days become brighter. They've seen difficult moments handled with unusual patience. They've witnessed hope appear where there used to be hesitation. People notice transformation before they understand its source. That mystery has quietly led every conversation back to you. Now here's something even more surprising. Not everyone in that room agreed. One person believed your influence was simply temporary, a passing chapter that would eventually fade away. Another felt something much deeper was unfolding. Instead of arguing loudly, they began comparing memories. Small stories. Tiny moments that seemed insignificant on their own but became impossible to ignore when placed together. Piece after piece. The picture became clearer. Have you ever wondered why certain people suddenly become impossible to forget, even when they're not physically present? Why their name keeps returning to conversations without anyone intentionally bringing it up? Because genuine influence doesn't announce itself. It quietly grows. And somewhere inside that family's conversation, someone finally recognized this truth. For the first time, they weren't asking, "Who are you?" They were asking, "What is it about this person that has changed everything?" Wait before you decide you already know the answer. Because the next part of this story reveals something even more unexpected. The conversation didn't end after that question. It became deeper. Someone reached back into the past and remembered a moment your soulmate had almost forgotten themselves. A seemingly ordinary event. A brief conversation. A simple decision that looked insignificant at the time. Yet when they connected it with everything happening now, it suddenly felt like the missing piece everyone had overlooked. Isn't it fascinating how life often hides its greatest clues inside ordinary moments? Most people rush past them. Only later do they realize those tiny moments were quietly shaping a much bigger future. And perhaps that's exactly what's happening here. Your soulmate's family isn't searching for reasons to judge you. They're searching for reasons that explain a transformation none of them can deny anymore. Stay close, because what someone quietly admits next doesn't just surprise the room. It changes the direction of the entire conversation, and you'll understand why nothing about this story is as simple as it first appeared. A quiet realization settled over the room. No one rushed to speak because every person seemed to be replaying the same memories from a different angle. One family member finally leaned forward and said, "Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along." The room fell silent again. They had spent so much time wondering who you were, yet almost no time asking why your soulmate had become a completely different person since your path crossed theirs. Stay with this story, because the next few moments uncover something most people never notice until it's too late. Another voice gently added, "Have you noticed how they don't react the same way anymore?" At first, everyone looked confused. Then one by one, they began remembering. The impatience that used to appear so easily had started disappearing. Decisions that once seemed impossible were now made with quiet confidence. Even during difficult days, there was a calmness that hadn't existed before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. The family wasn't talking about a temporary emotion anymore. They were witnessing lasting change, and every path of that conversation somehow circled back to you. Then something completely unexpected happened. The oldest member of the family smiled softly and shared a memory no one else had mentioned. They recalled the first time your soulmate spoke about you. It wasn't a long conversation. In fact, it lasted only a few minutes. But there was something unusual in their eyes that day, a sense of certainty mixed with hope. At the time, nobody paid attention to it. Now, looking back, everyone realized that was the exact moment everything quietly began to shift. Isn't it amazing how life's biggest turning points often look ordinary while they're happening? Before anyone could respond, another family member spoke with surprising honesty. "Maybe this isn't about finding someone perfect," they said. "Maybe it's about finding someone who inspires the best version of you." Those words changed the atmosphere instantly. No one argued. No one interrupted. They simply reflected on how true that statement felt. Every story they shared, every memory they revisited, pointed toward the same conclusion. Your presence had become part of a transformation they could all see but had only now begun to understand. And here's the part you don't want to miss. Someone quietly asked a question that no one in the room was prepared to answer. If this journey has already changed them so much, what happens when the right moment finally arrives? No one answered immediately, because deep down, they all sensed that something meaningful was still unfolding. The story wasn't reaching its ending, it was approaching its beginning. The next conversation inside that family would reveal a truth that even your soulmate never expected to hear. A different kind of silence filled the room after that question. It wasn't uncertainty anymore, it was reflection. Every person seemed to realize they were standing at the edge of a truth that had been quietly revealing itself for months. One by one, they stopped talking about the past and began wondering about the future. What if this connection is only at the beginning of its story? Someone whispered. Those words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded sincere. And sometimes, sincerity carries more power than the loudest voice ever could. Stay with me until the final moment, because what happened next became the turning point no one saw coming. The conversation slowly shifted towards something far more personal. Instead of discussing who you were, they began asking what kind of future could grow from the qualities they had observed. They spoke about kindness that asks for nothing in return. They noticed resilience that remained steady even during uncertainty. They admired the quiet strength that doesn't seek attention but naturally leaves an impression wherever it goes. None of these observations came from assumptions. They came from watching your soulmate become someone calmer, wiser, and more hopeful with each passing chapter. Then an unexpected voice broke the silence. It belonged to the one person who had been the most skeptical from the very beginning. Everyone turned toward them, expecting another question or another doubt. Instead, they smiled and admitted something no one imagined they would ever say. I think I understand it now, they said softly. This isn't about changing someone into a different person. It's about helping them become who they were always meant to be. The room grew completely still. Those words settled into every heart because they explained what everyone had been witnessing without realizing it. For a few quiet moments, nobody spoke. They simply looked at one another, remembering every conversation, every small detail, every unexpected smile they had seen on your soulmate's face. Suddenly, all those scattered moments fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had waited patiently to be completed. The family no longer saw isolated events. They saw a pattern. They saw growth. They saw hope. And most importantly, they saw a future that looked brighter than they had once imagined. Before the gathering came to an end, one final thought changed everything once again. A family member looked around the room and said, perhaps the greatest reason we've been talking about this person isn't because they're trying to prove anything, it's because their presence has already spoken louder than words. No one argued with that statement. In fact, several people quietly nodded in agreement. Actions had revealed what explanations never could. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you for being part of this journey. If these moments made you reflect on someone meaningful in your own life, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that uncover hidden truths through emotion and possibility, subscribing simply means we'll continue exploring these journeys together. As everyone prepared to leave, one last sentence echoed through the room, a sentence that no one expected, yet no one would ever forget. It wasn't about proving love. It wasn't about convincing anyone. It was simply this: sometimes the right person changes an entire future before they ever realize how many lives they've already touched. And with those words, the conversation finally ended, but the story between you and your soulmate felt as though it had only just begun. The story did not truly end when everyone walked away from that conversation. In many ways, that was the exact moment it quietly began. Hours later, while the house had become peaceful again, one family member found themselves thinking about everything that had been said. Certain words refused to leave their mind. Certain moments replayed over and over. It was almost as if the conversation had planted a question that demanded an answer. Before you leave this journey, stay with this final chapter, because the real reason behind everything becomes clear only now. The next morning felt strangely different. There was no dramatic announcement, no unexpected interruption, no grand event waiting around the corner. Instead, something much more meaningful happened. Your soulmate carried themselves differently. They smiled without forcing it. They spoke with greater confidence. Even the smallest choices reflected a quiet certainty that had not been there before. Their family noticed immediately. Nobody needed to point it out because true change never asks for attention, it naturally becomes visible. One relative finally broke the silence and said, "Yesterday we spent hours talking about that person, but today I finally understand why." Everyone looked toward them, waiting for an explanation. They continued, "It was never because of impressive words or impossible promises. It was because we've watched someone we love become more hopeful, more patient, and more genuine. That kind of influence cannot be ignored." Those words settled deeply into every heart. In that instant, the conversation was no longer about opinions. It became about perspective. People often search for extraordinary signs while overlooking the quiet miracles that unfold through ordinary days. Yet those quiet moments are usually where the greatest stories are written. Every encouraging conversation, every thoughtful decision, every moment of personal growth had been building toward this realization. Without realizing it, your presence had become associated with possibility rather than uncertainty. Then something beautifully unexpected happened. Your soulmate wasn't even in the room, yet someone smiled and said, "I think they're happier than they've been in a long time." No one argued. No one questioned it. Because everyone had already seen the evidence for themselves. Sometimes the strongest truth isn't spoken directly, it is reflected in the way someone's entire outlook on life begins to change. And perhaps that is the real reason your name became part of so many conversations. Not because people were searching for flaws. Not because they wanted answers. But because they were trying to understand a transformation that had quietly unfolded right before their eyes. As this story reaches its final page, remember one simple thought: meaningful connections are rarely recognized in a single moment. They reveal themselves through consistency, kindness, growth, and the quiet impact one person leaves on another. Long after words fade, those qualities remain. If this story made you pause and reflect, I'd love to hear what part spoke to you the most. Your thoughts in the comments might encourage someone else who needs this message today. And if you enjoy these cinematic stories of hope, mystery, and meaningful connections, you're always welcome to join this growing community for the next journey. Because somewhere, another conversation is beginning. Another unexpected truth is waiting to be discovered. And perhaps, without even realizing it, the next remarkable chapter is already finding its way toward you. A fresh realization unfolded long after the conversation had ended. One by one, Every family member carried those thoughts into the rest of their day, yet something unusual kept happening. No matter what they were doing, your name found its way back into their minds. It wasn't because anyone was trying to force the topic. It happened naturally, almost as if every unanswered question was quietly leading back to the same place. Stay a little longer, because the next discovery revealed something even more meaningful than anyone expected. Later that evening, your soulmate unknowingly walked into the room. They had no idea what had been discussed earlier, yet everyone noticed something immediately. There was a calm confidence in their eyes that hadn't been there before. They spoke with kindness, laughed more freely, and seemed lighter than they had in months. Nobody mentioned your name, not at first. Instead, they simply watched. Sometimes silence reveals more than words ever can. Then one relative smiled gently and asked, "Can I ask you something?" Your soulmate nodded. "What has changed recently?" There was a brief pause. A thoughtful smile appeared. Instead of giving a long explanation, they answered with a sentence so simple that it surprised everyone. "I've started believing that the right people help you become a better version of yourself." Those words echoed through the room. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Because deep inside, everyone realized that sentence explained everything they had been trying to understand. The conversation suddenly shifted from curiosity to admiration. The family wasn't discussing whether you were important anymore. They were recognizing the positive influence your presence had quietly created. They remembered difficult days when your soulmate had almost given up on certain dreams. They remembered moments filled with doubt. Yet now those same moments had been replaced by determination, patience, and hope. What if that was the real answer all along? What if the reason your name kept appearing wasn't about coincidence, but about transformation? Think about it carefully. People rarely spend time talking about someone who leaves no lasting impression. They remember those who inspire growth. They remember those who bring peace instead of confusion. They remember those who quietly encourage others to believe in tomorrow. Just before everyone left the room, one final voice broke the silence. "I don't think we're talking about this person because they're extraordinary," they said with a warm smile. "I think we're talking about them because they remind someone we love of the person they always wanted to become." The room became completely still. And in that beautiful silence, nobody searched for another explanation. Because for the first time, every question had found its answer. But one final conversation is still waiting, and what your soulmate quietly decides next may become the most unforgettable chapter of this entire story. Don't miss what comes next.